Storytellers don't just talk about the world, they shape it. The stories we share are like soil. They're living, dynamic, and the kinds of stories we choose to tell determines the kind of world that grows around us. Whew, alright. I recently got back from a creative trip to Ethiopia, and that trip was something else. So if you're not totally familiar with the work I do, one of the things is I team up with social and environmental justice organizations to help tell stories about the work they do, a lot of times through video and online content. And the main way I do this is through Plant with Purpose, the organization that I actually work for full-time. I've done this work for some other entities as well, but primarily for Plant with Purpose, and their Ethiopia program was one that launched after I had started working. It was the first new program that had started after my tenure, and I was really proud to go see it firsthand directly and see what has happened in that span of time. Now, typically what I do on these trips is I work with the local partner organization. I work with them to line up interviews, to arrange an itinerary, and then I'll typically bring in a small media team, and we'll go and conduct interviews, record B-roll, and conduct field visits. What I try and leave with is just a big collection of media materials that we can use in perpetuity for promotional videos, for explainers, for all kinds of things that can benefit the organization. Anyway, it was my first time in Ethiopia, my first time visiting that program, of course, and in many ways I approached it the way I've approached many of these media trips, which are starting to get a little more refined as a process now that I've done this a number of times. But we got there, and wow. This was in many ways the best media trip I've taken, and I've had some good ones. Ethiopia was really special, man, in terms of the volume of footage we got, the quality of the interviews, the uniqueness of each story. Yeah, that was really special. The whole recording process as well went really, really smoothly, and that doesn't always happen. And especially in a context like Ethiopia, where right now getting around from place to place can be quite difficult. Now, I hope what I did there can be replicated in future trips because it worked so well, but I think there was one key decision I made that led to this being such a successful trip. And by that, I'm not talking about like some philosophical framework or anything. I know I give y'all a lot of that, but I'm talking about an actual concrete decision. Here's what we're gonna do this time. Ready? It was hiring a local filmmaker and crew. So yeah, typically for past visits, I would bring over a US-based film team, and lately those have gone so well, I really did not feel this itch or this urge to change anything drastically. Things I could run out with the same strategy and it would probably go just fine. In fact, I don't like disrupting the system a whole lot because the type of work I do is so specific, and I've worked with the same teams over and over because, yeah, there's just so many moving parts, and if a team hasn't done this before, you never know. I think the foresight that comes with having done this before a few times is a huge advantage. So a few months ago, I'm getting ready, I'm getting all the things lined up for this trip, and the idea is like, why don't we try and work with a locally based team this time around? Instead of bringing over filmmakers, hiring some from Ethiopia. In my heart, I love this idea, right? I'm all about investing in local talent, and also, you know, I believe in letting people tell their own story, and of course that ideal is always, you know, you always run into a language barrier and the fact that you're telling a story to a very different audience. I've talked about this, but having somebody record it who is from that same cultural background, or at least speaks the language and is much closer to it than I am, that seemed like a big advantage and a step in that direction. At the same time, I was hesitant in a lot of ways. Like, where would I even find somebody? How would I know that I could trust the caliber of their work? Like I said, we need to be adaptable on these trips, and so it takes a lot for me to vet somebody who I can trust to handle all the curveballs that inevitably come our way. We had a lot of specific technical needs. We were doing features on forests and churches that required aerial images. But we decided to proceed, and that ended up being an incredible decision I am so glad I made. If you're ever in this position and you decide to go to this route, just know that the best way to go about it is going to vary a lot country to country, but just start by Googling for videographers and fixers in the place you're going. Some of the best finds I've had were people who simply popped up pretty early on Google and had the availability. I posted that I was looking for fixers, camera people, videographers, and noted the deliverable would simply be a hard drive full of footage from the visit, all the B-roll, all of the interviews collected throughout our time. I was able to build off of what I learned from my recent Bangladesh visit, where I worked with a fixer, and his input into the stories I was telling really helped provide so much richer insight. I think to date, one of the videos that came out of that trip is one of my favorites I've ever made. Having that positive experience gave me some confidence that it just might work out similarly in Ethiopia. So I found one guy's website and I particularly liked it. His experience looked solid and he had worked with several NGOs, so I thought he would know the landscape pretty well. I liked his taste and aesthetic sense, and I will say that if you can at least be on the same page with somebody on the level of taste, you're in a good position. It can be sometimes, it wasn't in this case because Yukino spoke perfect English, but even in cases where there might be a bit of a language or some communication barrier, being calibrated on the level of taste can help get you past that hurdle pretty easily. Anyways, I posted this opportunity and I instantly got hundreds of bids. Lots of people were interested. So the availability of somebody was not up for question. It was there. I got some people interested who were automatically disqualified because I mentioned I was looking for an Ethiopian candidate, and got a lot of interest from Europe and other places. And at that point I would just bring my own film team. But anyway, our strongest candidate ended up being somebody who I reached out to independently. He then later filled out the application that I had posted, but he was the same guy whose site and portfolio I had discovered. And one thing that really stood out about him was that in our conversations, he talked about liking to have a female member on his crew, because in Ethiopia especially, where I spent several weeks interviewing our top candidates from Ethiopia. It meant waking up pretty early in the morning to handle those Zoom calls. The time zones don't work out so well, but Yukino won out, and after that we had several early morning planning meetings. Early morning for me, late evening for him. We finally met in person at the Addis Ababa airport before flying out to a more rural spot where we would be doing the shooting. He brought along Abel as his camera operator, and I simply loved working with these guys. Like I said, Yukino's English was perfect, so we could talk to each other at ease. He also spoke Amharic perfectly, of course, and so this made him not only our videographer, but also a skilled translator. And he was a writer and a filmmaker himself, meaning he wasn't just translating to get ideas across, but he was doing so with a sense for how we would use a translation in a finished product. I think that made a big difference because I've worked with translators before who do a great job at communicating the idea, but not always in a way that gets us the results we are most looking for in our finished product. And after a week of shooting with these guys, I realized what they brought to the table was pretty irreplaceable. And here's how that adds up. First of all, as a local, they knew how to navigate the complicated terrain of Ethiopia. Ethiopia has seen a fair share of conflict between different regions and its central government in recent years, which led to a lot of disruptions to plans. The one that sticks in my mind the most is just before we arrived, maybe like a week prior. Ethiopia changed their restrictions around drones, so they were basically no longer allowed on planes. Yukino had been planning to fly from Addis to our filming site with a drone on him. He was now no longer able to do that, so he secured another drone in the region that we were filming. He arranged for the rental, the pickup himself. He took care of all of that. And if not for him, I would not have even known that the law had been changed. So having someone locally who can look out for that stuff, big win. When we got there and he explained this whole thing to me, I was like, yeah, that would not have even occurred to me. I'm so glad you're looking out. Now, when it came to actual linguistic translation, Yukino was also incredible. I started this thing where before we would go into an interview, I would also tell him, like, these are the questions I'm going to ask, but here's why I'm asking these. This is the type of video we're trying to make, so we want responses that hit these notes. And he would help translate the question in a way that would steer the interview in that direction, helping me get content that I could make better use of. He worded his questions in a way to get a reply that would be very useful, but he also did so in a way that put the subject at ease. I caught him a few times just letting people know to treat this like a conversation, to just relax, to be themselves on camera, things that I don't always have the easiest time getting across when I'm just speaking through a translator who translates at a more black and white level. My recent visits to Ethiopia and Bangladesh have told me that translation is more than just trying to make sure an idea stays intact while it's getting across, but there's this room to add an extra nudge, to go deeper, to tap into these details that often get flattened when you're just translating word for word. And a skilled translator and fixer can absolutely do that. Ultimately, my big motivation was to take the next step with ethical storytelling and really have it be stories of locals told by locals, and I'm just there as a vehicle to get those stories out into the world. I don't want to say it's like this black and white thing where hiring outsiders is unethical and hiring locals is always ethical. There's more nuance than that. But generally, this moves us closer to that ideal of people telling their own stories. There are always going to be other considerations involved, of course. Ethiopia is the second most populated African country, so the odds of us finding a filmmaker there were quite good. Other countries, this might not be quite as easy to come across. Anyway, that's pretty much all I wanted to do for Creative Changemaker this week, is to just share that experience, to talk about how meaningful and valuable it was, and to prod y'all, I guess, to say, if you ever get the chance to work with a local, to do what I did and find someone you can hire that's based in that community or in that culture, you should do it. You also probably make a long-term friend out of that, and that's awesome too. If you have questions about this whole process, you know where to find me, leave me a comment, and who knows, maybe that might just end up being another cool episode of Creative Changemaker. We'll see. In the meantime, take care. See you later.